Hey, entrepreneurs, we got a hot one for you today that you're going to want to take out a pen and paper for. Jeff Davis, been a serial entrepreneur and already built multiple national companies and been featured in Fortune magazine, CNN.Money, and quoted by Inc. magazine. He's founded 12 Mavens, which is a national community of CEOs and entrepreneurs who get together month to month with no subscription because he puts the pressure on himself to deliver value every time. In this podcast, John and I explore with him the 7 steps to getting out of the day-to-day weeds of your business. Lots of nuggets and nuances come from the conversation that we certainly found of value, and we're confident you will too. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here. Been looking forward to it.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. Can you share with our listeners what it is that you do today and a little bit of the backstory on how you got to be where you are?
Sure. Well, I guess starting with today, I'm the founder and chairman of a community of entrepreneurs and CEOs across the United States. Our members are primarily 5 million to 100 million a year businesses, some above, some below. And they meet together once a month in these private, confidential think tanks, and they serve as each other's sounding board. That's made up of like-minded risk takers. Once a month, they disconnect from all their in the business stuff and help brainstorm and solve each other's challenges and frustrations. The I guess short version of my backstory: I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. I was one of those kids that was like coming up with business ideas in 3rd grade, and college I started a skateboard company. I was cold calling skate shops around America. After grad school, I started a medical legal trial presentation company out of a small studio apartment, and I grew that company to serving law firms in about 40 states around the US. Got featured in Fortune, CNN.Money, Inc., stuff like that, and grew that for 11 years and then had an exit, sold that company. I joked that I retired for all of about 4 days because I have an inability to sit still, and then jumped right into building this community of business leaders.
And the community of business leaders, is that what 12 Mavens is?
Yeah, it started off, I joke, but it really is true. I had just sold a company I'd been scaling, working my face off for a decade, and I wasn't really looking to build right away. So I was more interested in having super long lunches with my wife really than anything. But I started a group of about 12 entrepreneurs, 12 CEOs who could meet together. I love brainstorming with other entrepreneurs. That's like my favorite thing, is talking to other entrepreneurs. I could just go for hours back and forth and sharing stuff and brainstorming. So we did that, just a group. But yeah.
I'm curious on a lot of our entrepreneurs, they have mastermind groups or they have peer-to-peer groups, and they get together for a period of time. And then sometimes there's diminishing return on that time investment because you can almost predict what other people in a room are going to say because you've been with them for a period of time. Yeah. Without giving away the secrets of how you structure 12 Mavens, I'd love to just get a bit of an overview on how you continue to structure it where it adds value year over year with the same group, or do you mix up the groups, or how do you keep it fresh?
Yeah, and the answer to that is it's both. We have the core group, but one of the really cool things that came out of the pandemic was, we went from these in-person localized group meetings only to meeting virtually, which was cool. With that was during that, I like to ask the question, what might be good about this? And so you sit there with a pad of paper and a pen with that challenge of what might be good with this, and come up with all these ideas. And we started putting together these kind of potpourri groups with CEOs in different parts of the country. We have, for example, one group, same group of CEOs every month. They all help each other. They're there for each other. They show up every month. And there are members of that group from Denver, Cincinnati, Ohio, Atlanta, North Carolina, Philadelphia, and that's pretty cool. And then when we have our big annual event, they're all seeing each other from the chest down for the first time in a year. And so that's one thing that's cool. We have these virtual groups. So if somebody's not able to make their usual core group meeting, because let's face it, business owners are the busiest people on the planet, uh, they can like literally just click in and brainstorm with a whole different group of CEOs. We have other meetings on other dates that they can hop in on, and a lot of them love that because of what you just said. It's a little variety. They meet new people that are in our little community that they hadn't met before, and we've had new businesses start from that. The other part of it is not just relying entirely on what they want to talk about. So every month we're bringing a mutually beneficial topic that everybody will get value out of. We're sharing new tools, software, books every month that they can check out. So and it's a professionally facilitated meeting designed to extract as much value out of it as possible. So we're not just relying on just the people's topics that they want only.
So it sounds like you'll have a blend of some of the entrepreneurs and business owners will come in and say, hey, I'd like some help on this particular area, or here's a challenge I have. Mm-hmm. And then following almost kind of a EO type format, maybe there are questions of clarification and then some feedback that somebody gets, they get value out of that. In addition to that, you have these mutually beneficial topics that you had mentioned where you'll bring in or provide a facilitator content that everybody can kind of chew on a bit. Is that accurate?
Yeah. We'll like show them tools that they might not have seen or heard of yet to check out and what they do. We don't sell them. They're just, here's like the direct, website to go to. So there's no so they don't think it's because we're going to get like a percentage of it or something. It's just like, here's a cool tool and here's their website. We have a PDF that they're going to get on a particular topic. We'll do an interactive exercise every month. It could be on, delegating. It could be on hiring. It could be on lead gen. It could be on, anything, culture. It could be on communicating more effectively. It could be on whatever. Every month it's different. So we obsess on trying to make sure people get massive value out of it because we don't have any annual long-term commitments. We do it on a month-to-month basis so people can opt out at any point. So we put it on ourselves to have to deliver, massive value every time. I kind of like that. We do that same thing with like our annual events. If by the lunch break, people don't feel like they've already gotten 10 times their money's worth by the lunch break, all they have to do is just go up and tell somebody and get fully refunded. We like, boxing ourselves into the corner to have to deliver value. And we have members that have been in their group since the group's first meeting years ago on a month-to-month basis.
And I think you had said, but I may be putting words in your mouth, that you also from time to time have videos or a book or an article or just things that are interesting that you'll put forward. How do you select those?
Yeah, listening to the challenges. I mean, I don't know if a day goes by that I don't ask at least one entrepreneur what their biggest frustration is in their business right now. I've asked literally hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs that, and in asking them, like, what do you want? What would be the most helpful to you? For example, in a few hours, we're going to bring on an expert on forecasting. It's not really the sexiest topic, but we're going to have, as an example, the guy who was a CEO of a $150 million company get on a Zoom with any members that are interested. It's just an extra thing that we're just doing for the CEOs in our community. If you want to go, here's the link, click in. We're going to have the guy who's the CEO of a $150 million company just talk on forecasting, answering any questions you have. And, so stuff like that. We're just always putting out whatever we think might add value. And I've been wrong plenty of times where I think they're going to be excited and they're like, Like, okay, we'll try something else.
Jeff, I want to bring us back a little bit to when you had your last company that you exited, yeah, I think it was in the medical space, and you said, you said comment a couple minutes ago, business people are the busiest people on earth, or entrepreneurs are the busiest people on earth. What was your biggest frustration for you when you were operating CEO of that business before you sold it?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, because that really is that pain is what led to the next decade of my life. I was the classic early 30s warrior mode, kind of trying to prove yourself phase. And I have a really hardcore work ethic that, I'm one of those people that I believe you have to fight like hell for a dream.
Yep.
And for me, that meant working every night and every weekend to get this idea I had, like self-funded, all sweat equity, starting in a little tiny, probably 500 square foot studio apartment a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I worked every night and every weekend and burned out. So my biggest frustration was I was one of those guys that I felt like I never had enough time. There weren't enough hours in the day. There were some times where literally I'd be in my office with a suit and tie, and I could see outside that the sun was starting to come up. Go, oh crap, I have to go shower and change my suit. They're going to see I'm still wearing the same thing as yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, this is, crazy. You can only push that pedal that hardcore for so long before you do burn out,
Sure.
And for me, it was a few years. So my biggest frustration was just so much work for so long. Like I forget, like I told you guys earlier before we started how I'd planned this 3-week trip to Thailand, and at that point with that business, and that was a few years into it, I not only could I not imagine taking a 3-week trip,
Yep.
I could not imagine working till dinner, having dinner, and then not having to do anything after that. Like, to me, at that point in my life, it felt like, I don't know how people can they just watch a movie and then they go to sleep. Like, wow, that blew my mind. Like, I was so entrenched in so many details, so understaffed, so undercapitalized, so,
Sure.
so entrenched in so many parts of the process. And I like taking the idea of Friday at 5 o'clock and then not having to do a single thing until Monday morning seemed like such a fantasy.
Yeah. Well,
Know.
here's my question, Jeff. I mean, you had success though, right? Like you put the time in, you put the effort in, you were underfunded. It's not by accident that you had this successful exit, that you're featured in these magazines. But if you had to go back and do it again, would you have done anything different? Or did you learn from that, some things that maybe you would have changed, or you're recommending CEOs change if they're now in their 30s, working 24/7 on their business?
Yeah, I think you're right to do a startup with limited funds. It is on you to make it happen. You do have to work your face off, especially that first year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I tell people when like aspirational entrepreneurs, somebody who's like planning to start a business or wants to start a business, I always tell them year one is kind of like that scene in Braveheart where they're just like running across the field. It's just battle. It's just bloody bodies. It's just like insanity.
Yep.
What's it? Michael Gerber, who wrote the email, says that people have this entrepreneurial seizure, and then they go into business working for themselves. And then he says, and then they soon realize they're working for a lunatic.
Yep.
Yep. And it's true. But it is true to a point, and then you become the bottleneck, and then you're limiting the growth. You get stuck at a certain revenue because it's about as big as it can get with the way that it is, with one person or a couple people's bandwidth and output that generates. So that medical legal trial presentation company that I started, I actually had a master's degree in medical illustration, doing like surgical and anatomical illustrations. And I used to wish that I didn't get that master's degree and I didn't know how to do it. So I could have just hired a medical illustrator sooner. I mean, I eventually did hire a medical illustrator, and then another one, and then another one, and had medical illustrators
Sure.
that were doing all the work and I wasn't doing any of it. But yeah.
So I see, on your profile that you wrote or created a program called the 7 Steps to Get Out of the Weeds of Your Own Business.
Mm.
Was that created while you were running that business, after that business, and what is that about?
It was partly both. It's some things that I learned the hard, dumb, expensive way,
Yeah,
painful way. And like, oh, that's worse now. Now I'm working. Now I have even less money, and it didn't work. Now I'm like working even longer
sure.
because it was like try this, and then it falls in, then you fix that, and like try it a different way. I mean, over several years, I wish it was like this aha moment, and then a month later, I was taking out traveling the world. That didn't work
Sure.
that way. So part of it is stuff that I learned, painfully over a few years from that, like when I reached that pain
Yeah.
threshold point. The other part of it is lessons that I've learned. One of the really cool things about starting 12 Mavens was, as you guys know, you get to have these conversations with these incredible entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
thought leaders, CEOs. I have picked the brain of so many Inc. 500 CEOs. I mean, I've had so many long conversations with the founders and CEOs of literally the fastest growing companies in America. I mean, hours and hours and hours and hours, and just analyze certain things that they do differently versus just like the classic limited small business owner that's just kind of never has enough time to do anything and all this stuff. And it's a combination of the things I learned with a combination of learning from those people, and honestly having the luxury of being at so many hours of CEO roundtables of
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah,
pretty
no
sharp.
doubt. We recorded a podcast recently called, moving from operating CEO to chairman of your own business, and how you have to replace yourself as the CEO if you don't necessarily want to die in that business, right? You have to kind of replace yourself and find ways to get out of the weeds. I'm curious, would you mind sharing, even at a very high level, what some of the 7 steps are, or if not all 7 steps
Yeah,
of that? Because if
yeah,
I'm an entrepreneur right now, I'm listening and going, okay, tell me, you've had all these conversations. How do I get out of the weeds here?
yeah. I'll be happy to. I mean, the first thing that I did and I realized was, you get so busy making what you make, selling what you sell, doing all the stuff that you're just too busy. You're doing this and doing this, or you have the ideas in your head and you kind of know this. So one thing that I did was I literally disconnected. Instead of going to the office on a Friday, I disconnected. I went somewhere with a pad of paper and a pen, and I just mapped out my plan of attack, or how I was going to do it. We had just had our first child, and I had this new little beautiful baby girl, and I didn't want to be that lame dad that's like never around. And I was so motivated with this little adorable little baby girl, that I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And so the first one is like map out your detailed, measurable, actionable plan. Not just I know what I need to do. I know I need to do, whatever. But like, where is it?
Sure.
Where's the plan? That's the first one.
Now, out of curiosity, was it just like an every Friday exercise, or was this like an annual detailed
It
plan, or was it a
it
weekly, or how?
started off as a one first thing, where it's like, oh crazy, I'm not going to be at the office for one day because I was like always there. I was always the first one in and the last one out. So for me, that at that point felt crazy to get
Yeah.
away and not be at I felt all these guilt issues at that time. Like, my staff going to think I'm being a slacker because I'm not in there, even though I'm like
Yeah.
doing such important stuff. But I mean, all those things are going in my head. And
Yeah.
so it was just like, let me just try to figure this out and make my life better.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a good husband, a good dad, more than I did just like growing revenue.
Sure.
And so then it turned into like I try to do that as many Fridays as I could, but it did become an annual thing where once a year I would really block off an entire day just to, all right, because the world has a funny way of filling in all these voids. You figure this out and you figure this out, but guess what?
Yep.
New hurdles are going to be dumped on your lap for sure, like 100%. So I
Yep.
started doing it every year, and each year I'd use part of what I did the year before, and I'd add other things, ask myself other questions. But after a few years, I used to think like, man, this would be so cool if I wasn't just doing this on my own, but there were like other entrepreneurs. We're all going through these same things together. We're taking the time to answer these questions. Like, what are my top 3 objectives going to be for the next 12 months? I don't know. You know, like how many entrepreneurs actually know what their top 3 objectives are? Like almost none of them. I know because I've asked groups of entrepreneurs to hold their hand up if they can say out loud exactly what their top 3 objectives are. And so, so I started doing that every year, and then that is, I started thinking about it'd be cool to have a room, and so I eventually my wife was just like, why don't you just do it one year? And this was 2013, and I booked a little ballroom, started telling some people, hey, in December, whatever it was, we're gonna all day long, we're gonna plan our attack, and I called it Plan the Attack. And we've since done it every single year since that December 2013. So we're coming up now on the 10th year that we've done this event, and people fly in from around the country now. We've had some pretty insane speakers come in, and it's pretty cool.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Awesome. So number 1, create your plan of attack.
Yes. Like a written out, as detailed and as actionable plan as possible.
Okay. Love it. What's number 2?
Number 2, build out a leadership and support team. We tend to have this thing where we're the hero, we're the star quarterback, and this person won't do it like me, and they won't do it like me. Or you get a little bit of part-time help, whatever, but build out a team. It's amazing. I know CEOs of like $50 million companies that don't have an executive assistant. That blows my mind. Because one of the things I've had the luxury of doing is not only interviewing Inc. 500 CEOs, but I started wanting to do interviews with the executive assistants of Inc. 500 CEOs, and it was fascinating. I did a whole series. We put together this whole little series of like high-level executive assistants. They're like Pepper Potts to Iron Man. That holy crap! I'd be intimidated if this was my executive assistant. I'd feel like they think I'm an idiot, because they're so sharp, so on top. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Like you see how the pendulum swings with somebody like that as your other half is amazing. Most entrepreneurs are visionaries and lousy at the management and execution of all their great ideas. So I think it's coming to terms with that, being okay with that, understanding that, and then if you're good at the vision and strategy and ideas and getting people excited, but you kind of dread the management and operations and execution, then who's that person? Who's going to be that yin to your yang? And support teams and building out a team of people, as Jim Collins said, like not the genius with a bunch of helpers, but like a true support team that can do some things better than you.
Yeah, absolutely critical. Okay, great. Got it. 3.
Mastering delegation. I've taken courses on delegation, read books on delegation, done interviews on delegation. And the bad news for me was it was almost always my fault. And I was like, oh, that sucks. I remember going to this delegation seminar and going to my car and being bummed out because it was almost all my fault. So, like, for example, if you've ever asked somebody to do something that in your mind should take about an hour and it's a week later and they still haven't done it, did you say, I need this by tomorrow at 3:30? Because they might have said, yeah, that'll take me about an hour, but I'll be, I'm not going to be able to get to it for about 4 days because I'm so busy or whatever. It was in that communication. Did you ask them to repeat it back to you to make sure they clearly understood it? Did you make it a clear checkpoint to see like the first thing before the whole thing? Like if you want them to print out 500 letters on ivory linen paper, did you ask them to print out just the first one and let you see it to make sure it's right before you do? You know what I mean? Like,
oh, I know exactly. I'm actually chuckling because I had a couple examples this week where I was talking to a manager and they're like, well, I told Jimmy that I wanted him to do this and he still hasn't done it. He was complaining. And I was like, well, did you tell him when you wanted it by? And he's like, no, but he should know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I have a list of like, I think it's like maybe 8 different biggies like that, like the few we said, that every now and then I'll like even like look at it and like, I don't know, I'm going to forget and leave a couple of these things out.
So you had overviewed, I think, 3 of them, like have a timeline, have the person repeat it back to make sure it's understood and accepted, have a checkpoint in place. Any other thoughts on delegation for listeners who are going, give me a nugget, I need to do it better?
Yeah. And I mean, you can tell I love talking about this stuff because I've left all of these out, in delegating, and I still not perfect, but I like having a written record of exactly what was done and what the ask is, because it's nice to have a week or 2 later and like, you didn't say whatever, but you're like, here it is when I messaged you in tech or the email I said exactly, or you'll see me like, oh crap, I forgot to say that, and it's just nice to have that sort of third party thing that can prevent some, tension or frustration. It's clear. But
Awesome.
those are, I think if you just nail just those alone, those would make a big difference.
Yeah, that's helpful. Tell us about number 4.
Systematizing, and turning everything into processes, and not, I mean, everything you do has a process. It's just, is it documented? Is it the every time? Is it clear? Did other people know that's the official quote unquote process? And this isn't an overnight thing, but and I think it's people know that, yeah, you should have a process for that, but do you, like, do you have like a process map that's like, here is our process map for interviewing and hiring and onboarding a new person. Here is our exact mapped out lead generation into sales process, like step by step checklists, screen capture videos that walk a new hire exactly through the way it's supposed to be done. All the answers to common questions are accessible somewhere other than the owner's brain. Anytime they're coming and asking you a question, it's because they don't have somewhere to go get the answer. And then you have to retrain them on where to go to get the answer. Like, oh, did you go to so and so? See if we have the process there. And then if we don't, record that video, record that screen capture, create that checklist. And it never ends. You're never going to do it all, because as you go over time, you're like, oh, we don't even use that software anymore. Now we have a different, or the software doesn't look like that anymore. We need to update it. Or, we used Jimmy's name, who Jimmy hasn't worked here for a year, So like doing it in a way that's not like, and then the process is Sally, sends this over to Tim, it's like position, or it's scalable, it's reusable. But I mean, that's the passport to freedom right there. But then not just doing that, but as you're doing it, don't just document it. This is super important. As you're doing it, you're at every step you're thinking, is this the best way? Could we combine these 2 steps into one? Do we need to do this and then do this? Could we just, how can you streamline it? And then also, if you see your name and you in those steps of the processes, how can I take myself out? So now the computer, like this tool automates that, or this person goes straight to that person. I'm out of it now. I'm going to train this role to take that over. And like, as you're documenting processes, you're streamlining them and seeing how can the process work without me in the process.
Yeah. And I found way too many scenarios, I'm sure you too, Jeff, where the CEO's like, put me in. I want to have authority over that. So before a proposal goes out, it needs to come to the CEO, and they're putting themselves in. And I agree 100% with you. It should be the complete opposite. How do I pull myself out of this process and put people in there that I can trust to make that decision?
And if that's you, listener, here's your motivation. My mentor, for years, is Harvard MBA, owns a bunch of different companies, super sharp, really successful. Years ago, a long time ago, we're sitting there having a conversation about my company, and I was like, "What do you think my company's worth right now?" And he's like, "Jeff, this is when I was entrenched in all the details." And he's like, "You're going to suffer from the key man discount." And I was like, "What's that?" And he said, to the degree that the owner, key person, is involved in the business, and without them, that this starts to suffer, is to the degree that that business's valuation is going to take a haircut. And this is a guy who literally owns a company that does business valuations. Like he has a company that does M&A deals, multi-million-dollar M&A deals. He owns a company that does business valuations. He knows what he's talking about. And we're sitting there in a restaurant, and I was like, all right, so if I get myself to the point where I'm doing almost nothing in the business, I could get hit by a truck and everything would keep trucking along, no pun intended, then how much more would my company be worth? And I always remember that I took a drink of water, and he said about 40%, and I almost spit my drink all over his face.
Yep.
I was like, hold on, you're telling me I get a business that could work without me, and I don't even have to go in necessarily, and I'll be able to sell my company for 40% more, and then anybody listening could just do the math. Like, imagine, God forbid, something happens to you today, a month from now, like your widow or your kids or whoever, your partner is trying to like sell the business for whatever you can get for it. Imagine what that amount is. Now imagine a different scenario where you're for the next 6 months you're improving all these different things to where the business is kicking ass with or without you. How add 40%, to do the math. Do the original number times 1.4 on the calculator.
Yeah, and forget about the math. Think about the lifestyle. If you're the chairman of your business instead of operating the business, it's a completely different life.
It's such a no-brainer. And the other thing is, like, especially if you have like a work ethic, like me, like or most people, most entrepreneurs, we work hard. We're willing to work these insane hours that we would never ask anybody else to work. And so we feel like we need to be there, kind of lead from the front sort of thing. And so it feels like it's wrong to not be doing this and doing this and doing that and all that stuff. But if something did happen to you, that all your employees, all your team members' jobs all are vulnerable. Mm-hmm. They might have to move. They might have. I mean, I brought people in from other states around the country to work in my company, and I remember thinking, God, if something happened to me, like Jason would have to fly back to Rochester, New York, or whatever. So
got it.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff, what's number 5? Break point? Is there a break point on when documenting the process becomes more important? And the reason why I ask that, it seems to me a company that has 100 employees plus, it certainly is important to have a process because people are moving in and out of the organization. You need to have very clear roles and responsibilities and who's doing what. And somebody that has 25 people in a company, it seems relevant, maybe a little bit less. Somebody that has a 2 to a 5 person company, it seems like that entrepreneur listener of ours is going, yeah, that sounds good to have a process, but it's going to take more time to put a process together than it's worth. The 4 of us know what each of us are doing. Is that an accurate statement at that size? Is there a break point where it's like documenting process is really important here, or is it always? And why do you answer the way you do?
It's great that everybody knows what they're doing until 1/4 of your business walks out the door with all their experience, and and then it goes 1/4 of the way your business runs IP just walk right out the door with them. To me, it's stupid to not do it. I mean, would you have a bunch of people all winging it from 4 or 5 people up to 20, or would you rather have everybody knows what they need to do, how they need to do it? It's all being like a streamlined, precision machine, or would you like people are just kind of doing it this way and that way? It's I would, as soon as possible. I mean, I remember documenting processes um, at the start, like at the very start.
Do you picture that being a consultant-driven thing, or do you feel like the average entrepreneur could just do it themselves, start documenting what everybody does?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends on the resources you have available. If you're small business, don't have the budget to bring in like professional document process consultants. You could use certain tools that you just do it as you go, real easy tools that are designed for documenting processes that you could just do it. Screen capture videos, start, something just basics to at least start from. You could always bring in somebody to fancy it up a little bit, if you needed. But
in my experience too, not to talk too much on this subject, because I do want to keep moving on, but I find that the percentage of businesses under 50 employees or under even maybe 100 employees that actually have these processes clean and cut, I think is actually lower than most people would think.
oh yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of weird when you think about it. I know in businesses that I've had where we said, we got to create processes. We create the processes, and then they'd be put into folders or whatever it may be. And then 3 years later, like, where's that process again that we did 3 years ago? And it was never updated. There wasn't that discipline that, as I hear you talk about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, why don't entrepreneurs have this discipline to create these processes?
It's the same reason. It's the same reason they're too busy to have these conversations. It's ironic when I talk to entrepreneurs and CEOs about. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about every month in our meetings. But it's ironic. Like, the main reason why somebody doesn't get involved in a group like this that has these conversations is, ironically, because they don't have time.
Yep.
That's the great irony is like, and I'll get into that in a second, but that's the great irony is they're just so busy doing what they do, making what they make, that they don't block off that time to stop and document the process, so the next time it could go smoother. Yeah, a lot of businesses have that binder of their SOP, their standard operating procedures, that it's probably you open it up and go, and all the dust blows off, and there's like a VHS cassette in there or whatever, but it's all laminated. But it's or some people think it needs to be fancy and real professional. Nobody cares. I mean, nobody cares. You can use tools like Loom, just record stuff, on your video, capture your screen on how something goes. Get on a Zoom, record explaining it. Doesn't have to be fancy. It's better that it's used and it's staying updated. I mean, you learn stuff as you go. Like when I did it with that litigation support company, we'd make a video that was like 25 minutes on the whole thing on how to do it, and then realize, oh crap, that one little part in the middle of it, we don't do it that way anymore. And then realize we had to do like a whole nother. So then we started making it where we had, I think it was like a 4 or 5 minute limit on any video.
Yep.
Couldn't be longer than that. And we started learning, give the videos titles that are super clear on exactly what that video is going to explain.
Yep.
Yeah, and I can imagine the longer the steps in the process are, the less likely they are to be followed, because somebody's not going to take that long, to your point.
So, exactly. Yeah. People see it and they're like, oh, 25 minutes, I'm out.
Well, that's helpful. I know we've got 3 more to go. Talk to us about number 5.
Number 5 is is a good segue. What I was just talking about is making the time to learn how to get better at automating, and how to get better at delegating, and how to get better at outsourcing, and all these different things that you could be getting better at is making the time. It's like if one of your immediate family members, God forbid, died, you're gonna go to their funeral, right? You don't care. You're gonna block off the time. You're gonna be there. Doesn't matter what emails are coming in for those few hours, because it was that important. You made the time. So it's making the time, not just being like that feather at the beginning of Forrest Gump. Remember, the feathers just kind of floating all around, and just making the time. Say, all right, maybe I'll do that before I open my inbox. I'll spend a couple hours on this or that.
And that's really an emphasis on making the time to get better. So that's really about practicing continuous improvement, specifically on removing yourself from aspects of the business. You referenced delegation, which is a way to remove yourself, automation, a way to remove yourself, outsourcing, a way to remove yourself. And it's specifically making time to get better at how are you going to remove yourself from key areas that you believe are your responsibilities today.
Yeah. Like making the time to say, all right, I don't know. I've been on a lead generation thing on this interview, but like using lead generation again. Okay, how could we make it more automated? How could we make it more, a more automated system? But taking the time to sit there and think it out, and not just being always too busy. Yeah, making the time, and it's making the time for everything. I remember asking one of our members, "What's your number one source of new business?" And he said, "Referrals." And I said, "How many books have you read on referral getting?" And he's like, "0." It's like, okay, so that's your number one source of new business already. Imagine if you turbocharged it and got all these bells and whistles, and really went to the next level with it, what you could do. But it's taking the time.
Love it.
Making the time, I should say.
Yeah, and prioritizing it, right? For sure. Okay, let's go number 6.
Number 6 is it's our own guilt, our own ego, our own limiting beliefs. I was guilty. I had all 3 of those working against me. I had like these guilt issues. Like I felt like I had to be the first one and I had to be the last one out, or I was afraid my employees think I'm like, what's he get to do? I had to, like, I would be done with my things for the day, everything I set out to do, that I checked all my boxes. But if I could still hear, a couple of my employees in the office, I just work on something else until I could hear them grab their keys down the hall, and it's dumb. So I went to work on that, like I'd have to, like, conditioning like a muscle. I'd be like, I'm the one that took on the risk. I'm the one that was walking to the office at 3-4 in the morning, coming or going every night. I'm the one that built this whole thing. I took the risk and like I designed. What's the point of starting a business if you're not going to build it the way you want it to be? The ego part is like what you talked about with it. I have to be involved in the proposal or whatever. It's like, I remember back in the Peyton Manning days, when he played for the Colts, they're really good. And then there's this one season where he was out for the whole season. I think they won like one game the entire season with Peyton Manning on the bench. And, that's not good. You don't want to be that person. Sure, it feels good that you're that star player, that when you're out, like, the team needs you. It feels good, but that's not what you want. You want to be like some coaches. I'll just keep with the football theme. There's some NFL or college coaches that are so good that they've put in such good coaches, such good systems, have picked such good players, all this stuff, that even when they leave the next season, the team is still good. And they're like, oh, maybe it wasn't even that coach. But I, at least in my opinion, think, no, that's how good they were, that it didn't just collapse like the second that they left.
Yeah, next man up.
Yeah, you want the thing to run great without you. Then you can pursue other passions. You could start other businesses. You could spend that time working on these new, bigger impact things that take your business to a whole nother level. And then just the limiting beliefs. Like one of my favorite quotes is the world is more malleable than you think, and it's I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something, and it's waiting for you to bend it into shape or something to that effect.
Yep.
But the core message of it is so important to me, that just, not limiting what I think I could do. I wanted to travel the world for an entire year and go to 29 different countries while growing a business. And then I did it, but for the longest time, I would have not believed that was possible. But it's just your own limiting beliefs. If you believe that you can't do it, then you can't do it. But if you believe the world is more malleable than I think, and I can bend it into the shape that's just right for me, then you'll be better off.
Got it.
I can see how these, and I'm curious as to what number 7 is, if it flows the same way. But I could see how these, almost in backwards order, serve each other. Here's what I mean by that. You have, like, dealing with your own guilt, ego, and limiting beliefs serves and unlocks your being open to making more time to be able to delegate, automate, and outsource, which really serves systemizing things into a process. And mastering delegation is one of the ways to do that. Like, what did you have these steps purposefully flow both forwards and backwards like that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I mean, the first thing is having a plan to give to a leadership and support team. You don't want to just rely on everybody else to kind of have their own different ideas for how this is going to go. You need to give them a plan to follow, and then delegating effectively to those people. I put that after the building leadership plan, because I don't know, I'm one of those guys, like, I'll forget stuff. I'll learn something and then I'll forget it, and so but like, I don't want to, like, learn all this delegation stuff and then, like, 6 months or a year later I've got somebody and I don't remember what the hell I learned. Anyway, so it's kind of like, as you're going through boot camp on it, as you're bringing in people again and again. But
Well,
yeah.
I can't wait to hear number 7, because in service of it going backwards and forwards, number 7 can either be the end or the beginning of the steps, I have a feeling.
Yeah, I think number 7 is it's funny you say, because I think of number 7 as the cyclical kind of spinning wheel sort of thing, which is leveraging other CEOs' hindsight on what's working for them, what's working for other business leaders that are all doing the same thing. They're getting out of the day-to-day weeds of their businesses. They're doing, how are they mapping out their plan? How are they building out their leadership and support team? What's working? How are they finding and hiring people? What techniques are they using to delegate? How are they systematizing their business? How do they find time or make the time to do, things like reading books or going to conferences or whatever? How do they, get into their mindset of how they're able to unplug and go on a vacation and not feel guilty about it, or what's working for other CEOs hindsight, and then group thinking on all that stuff. It's one thing for you to take these 7 things on your own, but like, if you're or if me just thinking out on myself on my own, but if the 3 of us are kind of like how we're doing, riffing on it and adding extra points to it, or asking a certain question about that aspect of it, and then it becomes more, right? If I just said these 7, or somebody just read a quick little article with these 7, it's not the same thing as the way the 3 of us are kind of pulling out certain nuances of it, kind of using a real world example of how something worked, or not to do a certain thing, and it just builds. It becomes more real. It becomes more tangible. It becomes more of a 360 thing, group thinking. And then also with other CEOs and leveraging their hindsight and the group thinking, you could also compound and layer that with accountability, with these other CEOs holding each other accountable. You said you were going to bring in an executive assistant by next month. Did you do it? or you have a terrible assistant you've complained about for the last 4 months, and you said you're going to finally, get rid of that person and find somebody better. Did you do it? You know what I mean? I feel like that kind of helps hold it all together, and it helps get each of those other 6 stronger on an ongoing basis, not just like this, one-off event and then fizzles out.
Well, you've certainly whet my appetite. I'm looking forward to getting the book and digging into it even more. I want to take a step back to one of the things that you had said was that you've spent a lot of hours, and you were actually really humble about it, but it was like, I've spent countless hours with a lot of CEOs of really big businesses, and you've extracted some similar lessons. Almost, I think of like a Tim Ferriss type, right? Like he's an expert at learning what the experts do. Can you share with our listeners, what are some of the common challenges that you hear those CEOs have, or maybe even in 12 Mavens groups? What are the common challenges that they're having? And what is some of the best advice you've heard based on that challenge?
Yeah, I would say different challenges sometimes for the everyday members of the group versus some of these like insanely successful people that I've interviewed. Some are similar. I've like literally interviewed the CEOs of like billion-dollar companies and stuff. But the most common challenges are, and it changes through time, but how do you find good people? How do you attract good people? It's hard to find good people. That's a common challenge, especially during the Great Resignation, and people aren't even showing up for interviews and all kinds of new obstacles. But finding great people is a common topic that we'll brainstorm on. A common one is getting out of the day-to-day weeds of their business. They're too entrenched in the minutia of their business, which we've talked about. Is most entrepreneurs are that sort of visionary thinker, and they're good at that side, but they're still too involved in the actual operations. How do you transition out of being so involved in it and more on it, in the cliche there.
So Jeff, I know we talked in this episode about the 7 steps to get out of the weeds. So that challenge, I think we've addressed. The first challenge you've brought up is one that I think is a big problem right now. When your groups talk about it, is there anybody who's got the secret sauce to that problem in terms of the finding good people? Because I know a few businesses myself that struggle with that. Any few tidbits that you've learned from your experiences with your CEOs that?
Yeah, and I would say it's been a moving target, from like right before the pandemic, when you have that conversation, during the pandemic, that conversation, post like coming out of it, it's kind of different and all these other things. But some of the great ideas that I've heard were marketing the role, how you would be like marketing your business, meaning actually having like an attractive, call it a landing page that sells the purpose of the business, the culture of the business. You've got how you might have on your website for prospective customers, you might have video testimonials of customers talking about your products or services. But like, for example, having a hiring page that has employees, team members talking about, every month we do this barbecue and I love how whatever it is. But people, it really talks to the purpose, and it talks to the kind of place that people would want to work at if they're looking at all these different options. Especially now, the applicants are more in the driver's seat right now.
Yeah, no doubt. But I found that I love what you're saying too. Like, way too many times we're marketing for customers, we're doing digital marketing for customers, but how much are you doing that for attracting talent? And obviously it has to be true. Like, it's hard to recruit customers if your customer testimonials aren't there and your customers aren't saying good things about you. It's hard to recruit, new team members if your team members aren't saying good things about you too. You have to have that right culture. One of the things that I've found recently, and I maybe have a thesis on, I'm curious if you're seeing it on your end, is today's workforce wants to feel a sense of ownership in where they are versus a paycheck. They don't want to go work for somebody. They want to go work for something, but also feel like they're a part of it. How much are you seeing, companies reaching out to make their employees a part of the business from, some sort of equity component or phantom equity or things like that coming back? Are you seeing that a lot?
Yeah. I mean, things like phantom equity come up in our brainstorming sessions, and it could get 30,000-foot conversations about it, or we can go like literally. Sometimes it gets really into the granular tactical details of like, call this person, here's his name and his phone number and his email, and this is exactly what they do, is help businesses create phantom equity profit sharing plans. They have like 5 different types of, a sense of ownership structures that you can give, and they'll explain how they work, that kind of thing. That for sure, I've heard, the members of our groups mention the book Ownership Thinking a bunch of times, and having the whole team read it together and then have a meeting where everybody discusses what their takeaways were, and then actually taking some ideas from the book and implementing some of those things into the business.
Love it. Well, that's great. I know, Jeff, in closing here, I think you have a 12 Mavens strategy session that you run. Is that accurate? And can you tell our listeners a little bit more about that if they want to get some more of this?
Yeah, to me, those are like the funnest thing when I get a chance to jump into one. It's just like a time to, like we said, disconnect and spend some time talking about your top objectives, your biggest obstacles, your biggest frustrations, and just kind of thinking out some of these things and answering some questions, writing out some notes, getting some actionable next steps. I got an email from a CEO who went through that same process. That it takes like, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes to go through, and we focus on some of these questions that, thought-provoking questions, and actually getting out the answers in real time. And he sent me an email recently that he went through that a few years ago, and he said he kept his notes from it on his desk, and he said he grew when he did that. He was still under $1 million, just do like a few $100,000 a year in revenue. And then he said over the next 3 years, I guess it was 3 years ago or something like that, over the next 3 years, he grew to like multi-millions in revenue. And he said it was gold. He kept it on his desk the whole time and referenced it all the time to help him get focused. So all people have to do is just go to 12mavens.com, like the number 1, 2. I think we have it either way spelled out, or the number, but 12mavens.com/session. SESSION, and it's free for your listeners to go through it. We do it because this is our passion, our obsession is doing everything we can to help entrepreneurs be rewarded for all the freaking kicks in the teeth that we go through. I've been through the pain, and I knew whenever I sold that business, I knew I wanted to do something that has an impact on people, so they can not just grow a business, but have a great life and good quality of life, which is hard as an entrepreneur. That's why we do it. And then the other reason is obviously if, during the conversation at the end, it feels like, continuing these kinds of conversations and brainstorm with other CEOs might be helpful, then we could talk about it if you want and see if that might be a fit or not. Either way, though, you'll get tons of value from going through it.
Well, it sounds like an amazing return on investment for 30 to 45 minutes, and appreciate that gift and all the gifts you've given us today. A lot of great information here, and look forward to learning some more as we go dive into these tools here.
Awesome, man. I hope that was helpful.
Very much, you, Jeff.
Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
Step number 7 that Jeff talked about on leveraging other business leaders' lessons in hindsight. It reminds me, John, of, I think you and I were taught many moons ago, the word was borrowed wisdom.
Yep.
And there are a lot of business leaders that have wisdom that they paid the lesson for that you could borrow for free. And you just have to be curious enough and humble enough to ask good questions of smart people so they can reflect on the expensive lessons they paid for, that many of them are very willing to just give them away as borrowed wisdom.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, that's part of the reason I think we're here doing this podcast together. And if listeners are listening to this episode or all of our episodes, I mean, that's the reason why they'd be listening as well. And, one thing that Jeff strikes me, you mentioned another podcaster, but Anthony Robbins, one of the things he always talks about is how many people he's interviewed himself, because he's trying to borrow that wisdom from everybody that he talks to. And through the years, he's become an expert in finance, an expert in health, an expert in business, not because he went to Harvard, but because he interviewed all these individuals and grabbed all their learnings to sharpen his saw along the way. So I think that's a very powerful thing, whether it be EO groups or 12 Mavens. I think 12 Mavens is a very unique approach to what he's doing. And I love the concept of how he started and what he gives back to people. I mean, even going back, just to touch on his concept for a minute, because we didn't really talk about it too much in the episode, but most of these groups that I've been marketed to over the years from a CEO perspective, that, hey, join this group or join that group. I always looked at the price tag and said, I don't know if for $5,000, $10,000 a year, I'm going to get a return on investment on this. I'm just going to go read some more books and talk to CEOs. And I ended up not doing it. And I did it once and got out of it pretty quick. We didn't really touch on the fact that Jeff talked about his group is a monthly subscription. And if you're not getting enough value, get out. You can get out like immediately. Not too many groups do that. He must be very confident in what he provides and has had a lot of success in what he provides. And he talked about a session he was running even this afternoon. I'm like, how do I get into that session? It sounded like a really good thing. So, I'm personally going to look into this, the 12 Mavens group for the CEOs I work with, because it just seems to me to be a very flexible group where you get to meet other great people. And if you're not getting your return on investment, you can get out very quickly. And so that leads me to believe that he has a lot of confidence in the product he's providing.
Well, he even said purposefully, it's putting the pressure on them to deliver great value time after time after time. I thought it was kind of cool and made a note on it that at his in-person sessions, if you don't get 10 times the value for your registration fee by lunch, go ahead and leave. We'll reimburse you. Like, we want you to get value so much that we don't want your money. If you're not getting 10 times your money, we don't want your money. So, the confidence in the product and the intentionally applied pressure to deliver maximum value always definitely came out. I thought his statement on the suffer from the key man discount story, that was a lesson from that was borrowed wisdom that he received from a mentor of his. That was so well put, because a lot of people, you hear like, document your processes and you want to delegate to the middle and lower parts of the chain of command so you don't have to be involved in it and remove yourself. Like, you hear all that, but when it gets grounded in, you are discounting your sale price by being over involved in it, and discounting it by what? I know he said 40% over, so that's like discounting it by ballpark a third of the sales price. Like, that's enormous, and it really put it into context in a way that I hadn't considered before.
Not only that, though, and I mentioned it while we were talking about it, it's not just the financial implication of this. The implication that you're burning yourself out, believing that you need to be in every single step of the process and controlling everything, and everything has to go through you, and not allowing your team to make decisions. And, this whole concept of entrepreneurs or CEOs are the busiest people on earth, and they just never have time. One of the big things that he put in his steps that has been extremely valuable for me, probably since 2019. So for the last 3 years, is making time. Now, you and I have always had these conversations over the years. You can't make time. There's only 24 hours in a day. So you can't make a 25th or a 26th or 27th hour. But the way you make time is prioritization of what you're going to do. And, when he talked a little bit about disconnecting to create your plan of attack, and also number 5, make the time to get better. What really connected with me, and it goes all the way back to Dr. Julie Bell, one of our first episodes when we first started this conversation, was grab a blank sheet of paper every day, put 20 minutes in your calendar and write, what are you thinking about? And you could take that exact same concept, because I've been doing it somewhat religiously over the past 2 years. There's days I don't do it for sure. But taking that 20 minutes, blank sheet of paper, and asking yourself, how can I get better at something, right? What is it? How can I improve my business? How can I pull myself out of a process? That's all extremely powerful things to grow a company, to replace yourself. You have to replace yourself as the CEO of your business as quickly as possible to create the most value in your company.
And it's, again, I use words speaking to practicing continuous improvement.
Yeah.
And along those lines, I think it's understated in the podcast, but I appreciated, as a professional coach myself, the coaching questions that just come so naturally to him. When he said, like, what's your number one source of new business? And somebody would say whatever they'd say. Well, how many books have you read on it? Like, I mean, what a wonderful coaching session. And you don't have to ask of new business. You can ask that of anybody in any role. Like, hey, what's the number one talent that you feel you bring to your role? How studied are you on that? Like, it's just brilliant. It's a genius question. And then he says, I ask people all the time, what's the biggest frustration in the business right now for you? What do you want? What can we do for you? Like, the power of those questions, and they're really coaching questions. Again, it was understated in the podcast, but it wasn't lost on me. He is a really good question asker, and I could see how people are just magnetized to want to be with him and see what he says or asks next.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, I love that example you gave about focusing on your strengths really initially when you're talking with somebody, right? Is part of growth mindset, and part of a CEO growing their business is a CEO entrepreneur can't be everything in their business. Some are good leaders, some are good creators, some are good visionaries, some are good salespeople. You have to complement your team, and asking some very simple questions sometimes of entrepreneurs, and asking questions of yourself. Like, a question that he asked that we didn't really talk a lot about, that he asks himself a lot, is what might be good with this?
Oh, I just was looking at that note on my paper and I was going to mention it. That stuck out to me too.
Right? What might be good with this? What a fantastic question. Because even if something is not so great, you can ask yourself that question. What might be good from this? What am I going to extract from this? Maybe it's a learning you're extracting from a bad situation, but you're at least looking at it from a positive perspective, as opposed to, poor me, this happened. There's a lot of growth mindset components that I think he brings into his coaching. He brings into 12 Mavens. He brings to his entrepreneurs that I love.
What might be good about this? What an open mindset. And it's not what is good. What can we predict would be good with relative confidence? What might be good? Right. And having this whole list of exploring options, it's such an open question. Tagging back to a recent podcast, are you open to? Yeah. That is such are you open to what might be good about this type question?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think this whole conversation, we could have probably gone in a million different directions with Jeff. But I really love where we went to 7 steps to get out of the weeds. And he said another thing earlier, and I think he was talking about processes and systemizing your business. He said, there's a passport to freedom. Mm-hmm. Way too many entrepreneurs are locked into their business. They can't get out. They're in this rat race. They can't get out of whether it be a revenue cycle or a cash flow cycle, or they just can't break free. Not only their personal time, but also the business can't break free to create great wealth for them and their business and their stakeholders. And there's this passport to freedom, ultimately, as an entrepreneur, if you can follow these 7 steps to get yourself out of the weeds and really focus on these versus maybe some of the micro items in your business that you're trying to influence and you're trying to get into the weeds. Pull yourself out, get your passport to freedom, grow your business.
I think that's a great place to end our debrief. Is we just discovered, I think, the title of this podcast, Passport to Freedom.
Love it.